Right, y'all. Welcome, Antoinette, Adanette. What's up? Anna Bernie across the pond. What's up, y'all? Thank you so much for making time for us, for holding the space for us. Thank you. We experienced some technical difficulties, and we're here, right? And we're really honored to be here with you. In case we do continue to experience some technical difficulties, what we'll do is we'll try, right? We'll try to stay here as much as we can, right? And so what that means is we might turn off cameras to create some more broadband access for our voices to be heard. You know, we might go lower tech than right now, if that's cool with y'all, right? And we'll keep on checking in. We'll keep on checking in to see where we are if anything happens. But I feel good now. I feel like things are clear. There was some incense that was burned, and I think that's supporting all the electromagnetic radio waves that were disturbing us previously. So what's up, y'all? My name is Luis Alejandro Tapia, and I am the network doula for Illuminate. And Illuminate intends to create, to sustain, to nourish, to cultivate field of systems change that is regenerative, that is just, that is equitable for all, right? And so part of the work that we are intending to do, and specifically through this platform and through this series, this dialogue series, is really to illuminate the work, the practices, the lineages, methodologies, frameworks, et cetera, of folks in the field of systems change, right? And so today we have a very special person with us today, and I'll let Tatenda introduce herself in a moment. But I want to say that from my experience of Tatenda, there's always a groundedness that I find in just being in space with Tatenda. I think there's always also I don't know, it's a challenge. I don't know. I don't think that's the right word. I think what happens is I get to think about what it is that I'm saying and what I mean by what I say, right? I think that there's a certain intentionality and criticality that I feel like, okay, all right, Tatenda's gonna be there. All right, so I gotta, when you put that, oh, okay, so this person's coming to the party. All right, I gotta put out the good snacks. You know what I mean? Like I can't. So that's how I'll introduce you to Tatenda. And then we'll get into it. We'll get into it. As folks know, this is a space for us to be in dialogue, right? This is a space for us to really learn about Tatenda's journey, her work, her methodology, the work that she's currently doing, ways that we can engage with that work, and what systems change means to Tatenda as a practitioner, and also what Tatenda's practices can mean to us as practitioners in systems change. So without further ado, Tatenda, what's up? Welcome. If we were on Clubhouse, I'd be like clapping. Hey Tatenda, tell us, like about yourself, how you got into this thing, and how do you define, like, what do you call your work, and how would you like for us to talk about your work?
Okay, I didn't expect you to ask me what I call my work, but I will go into it. So hi, everyone. I am Tatenda Nzingha Mazowe. Thank you for coming to this session. I'm so pleased that there's so much support for the session. Hello, Anna. I would say that I work with relational systems. So for a long time, as I was developing my work, I kept thinking around I was like circling the same concept over and over again with the Baobab sessions. One was conversation heals. So I keep wondering, like, okay, why do I say conversation heals? Why am I thinking restoring the circle? And why is the relationship between the individual and society so important to me, and the different systems that emerge from that? So I would definitely say that my work in systems change is relational systems work. How that shows up is, in my wellness practice, I really do focus on people who have survived intense abuse. I would say people with complex post-traumatic stress disorder, people who are typically hard cases, like you've gone to a couple of therapists, it's not working, it's been 10 years, and you require a radical approach. So that is the work that I do. And how I see that as systems change is really, I trust that an individual is like a coffee bean. So people who are willing to individuate, people who are willing to really do the work on themselves, and who are willing to radically change whatever structured them in the first place, whatever conditioning created them, then can go out into the world and they can, how can I call it? They can then influence the system rather than perpetuating dynamics. The other work that I do is, obviously, I am a creative. So that is just something that is part and parcel of who I am, and shifting narratives, presenting opportunities for different people to really speak about themselves, and creating transgressive art at times, it's not always transgressive, is an opportunity to question something that is ephemeral. So that is my work. That is how I approach systems change. What I will be talking about specifically today is touching on the Baobab sessions just at the beginning, which is the work that we are doing with Illuminate. I am doing with Illuminate. My intern is not here. She's been sick for like 2 weeks. So, it is what it is. I'm sure she'll align quickly. But the Baobab sessions was supposed to be a way for people originally to communicate, to come together. It started off as a facilitated space where we worked with marginal, and I say this because I'm tired of that word, communities. And then it evolved. It evolved to take advantage of Web 4.0. It evolved to take advantage of restricted movement, and it became a podcast, and we are now working on a sit-down conversation style engagement. That has been challenging. I'll tell you how this work emerged. And as a result of the challenges that I experienced with the Baobab session, and as a result of looking at all my work and my own personal journey, I started thinking about alternative dispute resolution. So what does alternative dispute resolution mean? And as someone who created Ocean PO about it and advocacy about it, and so, I mean, it's been a little turtle, it like started in 2018 and it's been like oompa loompa, like moving along. But during that work, I stumbled across really big challenges that I didn't anticipate. And it's a knack of mine that I wish I didn't have, but it's like I can logically strategize around something, but I can also sniff out like rot on in the most beautiful and pristine situations. So that's where Ocean Rises got, and I decided to re-strategize. I decided to completely re-strategize how we were going to move, what we were going to do, and this is where we are now. So how this worked was, during working on the Baobab sessions, I noticed that the healing justice approach wasn't working because people tend to magnetize. So when I speak about trans personality, I mean that a lot of people come together subconsciously without even knowing what they have in common. You don't know what gravitates you towards a particular drawn to in your life. You have more similarities than you realize. And that's really what happened. And so we tended to be moving along the same cyclical path, like the people I kept coming across, and it became really, really wide as I possibly can. But at the same time, I kept drawing the same people, the same patterns, the same challenges, the same issue. And so I decided to change it and say, okay, how can I make this more sustainable and lose my attachment to having a divergent community represented and be open to looser degrees of connection? So people who were connected by at least 3 to 4 degrees, right? And it was heartbreaking for me because I'm the first person to scream and shout about echo chambers. I'm the first person to be like, no, that's disgusting. But I had to adapt this. And in this reframing process, I realized that there was a meta narrative that was running through here, which was how relationship systems, one, adapt, and also that they're always meta narratives in relationship systems. So then I asked myself, okay, so how does this play into the idea of transpersonal justice? How does this play into the idea of transpersonality? So what is going on that is more than what we see and what we know about ourselves, right? That brings us together, and where does come into play? So that was the seed behind the work. That is the seed behind the ADR work. And to really ground it, I speak about alternative dispute resolution as someone who has read all the books. And I'm sure a lot of people here have read like all the books, you know, Native American practices around alternative dispute resolution. I live in South Africa. Everybody knows about the TRC and Rwanda and all these other tribunals that happen. But the reality of the situation is, I hate this word, I'm going to say it. Please forgive me, anyone else who is here. Tribal practices around alternative dispute resolution are challenging, to say the least, because what we have here in Southern Africa is a very strong recognition of your right to believe what you want, a right to practice your culture and tradition. And even if you don't have the right people, do it anyway, right? So I looked at South Africa and I was really inspired by the work of Sister Letta Moose. She has since passed on. And she wrote a book for her, she wrote a paper for her thesis on psychology, which was the living dead and how ancestral communication is important in restoring community. And I was really inspired by that because that was my first time coming across a Black woman talking about transpersonal justice and its impact on community structure and tradition. And that got me asking myself, okay, fine. So this is alternative dispute resolution. It also speaks about transpersonal justice. It also speaks about how to heal a community. And I was like, huzzah, this is great. Healing justice, all these things that I love. But it's already done in South Africa, right? People studied it, people have written it, people talk about it. It is well practiced. And then I was like, okay, so what would make my work distinct? What would make it important? What would make it matter? And who am I doing this for? And so I went, okay, fine. And in a conversation with someone who turned out to be a participant in this ADR inquiry, I found out that Zimbabwe has had far more crimes and atrocities than people are willing to acknowledge. So the society has this veiled layer of patriotism that is almost like feverish. You know, you're a patriot, Pamberine Zanu, which is like, yay, Zanu PF, and also speaking about the Chimurenga. So to put this in context, the Chimurenga was the liberation war. And anyone who studied the history of Zimbabwe knows that there was a Chimurenga before the 1970s and the 1980s. Mbuya Nehanda, right? And Sekuru Kaguvi, and it was the first resistance. But what happened this conversation revealed was in the 1960s and the 1980s, soldiers went to the rural areas children were taken in the rural areas. Soldiers would threaten these children and say, show us where these freedom fighters are, where these freedom fighters are. And then they would kill these children and they would murder entire families. And so there's this scar in the psyche of a generation of Zimbabwe matter. You must rat it out to this. And there's a famous photo, actually, if you look at a Rhodesian soldier swinging a black child, right? That's part of the history of Zimbabwe. Another thing that is part of the history at that time was, I said it is past. That is such a Freudian slip. I think it's something that we all tell ourselves when atrocities happen, right? And anyway, so people then started turning around and accusing people of belonging to the liberation struggle. And so neighbors would go there and they would say, look, this person was part of the liberation struggle, and it could be a vindictive thing. And people got killed because of that. And that stayed in the psyche. Then liberation happened. And then while people were celebrating in Mashona land, Kukurahundi happened. So there was a genocide in southern Zimbabwe. Right. And it was just like, keep it moving, you know. Then there was the second Chimurenga, which is the third Chimurenga, really, the land grabs. Okay. And then keep it moving. We're doing it for our freedom. Remember the Lancaster Agreement. 2008 elections, MDC was a huge contender against ZANU-PF. And what was happening in Zimbabwe in the rural areas where chiefs were actively involved in having people beat up. People got long sleeves or short sleeves. So war vets would cut people's hands. So you want to vote for MDC and make examples of people, we'll give you a short sleeve, which is cut off someone's hand, or a long sleeve, which is amputate someone at the elbow. None of this has ever been addressed. None of it. So the psyche is on. That's literally it. I said to myself, okay, fine. So what can I really look at? And why has this somehow shown itself in how families relate to one another and how the community relates to one another? What does this mean for transpersonal justice and healing justice in Zimbabwe? And so that was the essence of the inquiry. That was the spark, the motivating factor. So I then went into it. And I was like, okay, how do I make the most of this? How do I make the most of Zimbabwean people being in the diaspora, considering who can speak, how they can speak, and how they will speak, depending on where they are? So I twisted and I turned, and at the reality of the situation was I had to use technology, and I had to be open to people who knew one another, referring people in relations to the third and the fourth degree. Luckily, with this inquiry, I was able to speak across class. So I was really fortunate, across class, across gender, but I had to make an executive decision to take the age up. So there was really no speaking to youth about the work because it wasn't necessarily relevant. So to make this meaningful, especially looking at a relationship system, to create a stable system or a stable enough system that it could be like, okay, this is valid, I started narrowing the parameters. 1, Black people. And I'm like, okay, Black people, that's cool, but what does that mean? African Black people. Okay, African Black people, that's cool, but what does that mean? So yeah, that's the right slide. African Black people, that's cool, but what does that mean? And then I'm like, Southern African, Zimbabwean. And then I'm like, okay, fine. Now we've got Zimbabwe, let's go to a cosmopolitan city, the capital, Harare. Then I narrowed it down in Harare to Shona and Ndebele people who had some relationship to the Shona tribe, right? And from there, I said, okay, everybody who I speak to must be 38 and older. So I was aiming for people entering their 40s and people in their 50s and older, because they would have accurate memories of what happened, and they would have some sort of strong tie to a person who lived in the rural areas and directly experienced traditional practice or experienced traditional practice on their own. So that was the foundation. Let me just take a deep breath in here. Okay. So what happened when I looked at this is I had to be kind of flexible and open in the manner in which I inquired, and I had to be open to using technology, and I had to be aware not to ask leading questions. And I know that every single person who does an inquiry knows this, but it can be as simple as when you're speaking to someone and you have some modicum of insight, you can bring a perspective. So I'll give you an example here. This was framed in terms of looking at alternative dispute resolution and its efficacy in healing justice. What is well known is when it comes to property, livestock. What is well known is when it comes to, conflict, right? Where it's very open. You stole my cows, you poisoned this, blah, 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 blah. You pay, you owe me this and this and that. But what was so pertinent that came out of COVID, especially the social ills that arose, was what happens in cases of gender-based violence, specifically when there is rape, specifically when there is assault, specifically in relation to a clan space, right? So there's the what I would call the private sector in this case is the nuclear family, different from other family structures. So nuclear family is literally what is the Western nuclear family plus all of your cousins, all of your aunts, that's your nuclear family. And then the public sphere, is the clan, right? So your neighbors are part of the clan. So I isolated those parameters, and I was fortunate enough to have and continue to be in conversation with a chief, so a head of a tribal area, an elder who is over 80, 6 women who are over 38, 2 in their 50s, 1 in the diaspora, 1 not, 2 lawyers, 1 who's practicing in the private sphere, 1 who's practicing in a state organization, and also immigrants who are working class and immigrants who are also vulnerable in South Africa, particularly because they're not renewing their work permits. So they've renewed them for another 6 months. And if you don't have one, you get 2 weeks at the border and you have to pay for extra days. So I had this conversation and I was like, okay, fine, guys, let's talk about what is going on. One of the things that helped me in my inquiry was I've read so much what's happening, right? It's not what's happening. What I was really clear about was to look at the stated values and then the shadow values in the system. So the stated values in the traditional ADR system are restitution, restoration, and redress, and the clear values. And the shadow values, which sounds so strange, is keep peace at all costs and the community together. And why I say these are shadow, what happens between clan members, the result of this structure between clan members, and the result of this structure within a family group. Okay, we can go to the next slide. All right, so let me break down the framework. When there is a conflict, according to traditional systems, you start within the family group, right? And the family group works like this. There's your patriarchal family and your matriarchal family. Your patriarchal family, if you are a woman, you are represented by your aunts. They are your roadies. They are the people who are your ride or die. They will petition for you. If someone has to set something on fire, they will have the matches and the gasoline. That's what it's supposed to be. When you're a man or a boy child, then it's your uncles. And so it goes aunts and uncles, and then the elders in the family. If that fails, then you get to the head man, who is the local court, the head of the local court, and he's called Sabuku. And then the tribal council. The tribal council is typically comprised of men, but women can also be voted into the tribal council. And if that fails, then you go to the chiefs. Typically, though, there is a chasm between what happens. So when I was asking these questions, I know what happens when it comes to property, but let's talk about gender-based violence for a second. Okay, so everyone's like, oh yeah, okay, cool, gender-based violence, yeah, that's fine. And I'm like, do you have any knowledge of what happens? And the first position people take is to kind of say, well, I have no experience with it really, like it's not part of my life. And then they start telling, can you even believe that this happened? Can you believe that this would happen? And it shows that there is an innate system of prejudice. Women are disadvantaged. So the negative end of a crime, I believe that this is what happened. So what the system fosters is that it is hierarchical, it is patriarchal, it is also authoritarian, right? So when it comes to inter-clan violence, there will be a resolution if there's gender-based violence. There will be a resolution if there's sexual violence, physical violence, murder, right? You will go to the headman, it'll go straight to the headman, there will be an adjudication, and then there is some form of kuripa, or the payment of damages, right? That is if it doesn't immediately implicate the criminal law. And the result of this is that people are peaceful, crime is low. Inter-clan violence is low, save for the occasional drunk day and people have a fight. But a really sad reality that comes out of this is that when it comes to family situations, family circumstances, there's an ethic which is so toxic and it's so dark, and it's called kuriga, to hide, or kushisa. And to translate it directly, it's that saying that we all know, which is don't hang your dirty laundry out in public. So when you have instances of sexual violence or physical violence in a family, right? Depending on your position, you will approach different channels, but the net result is this: you can approach a headman, but remember that the headman is a subsection of the community that you already live in. He could have his own issues, and he is always a he. And so you're sent back to go sort it out in your family, right? And for me to illustrate what this actually looks like is I would like to open up this conversation a little more so we can do a case study together, where you guys choose a scenario and we talk it through so we can all come to logically understand how a case would operate in terms of alternative dispute resolution. So my question to everybody who is here, and I don't know, Lou and Marichela, how you guys are going to facilitate this, but I would like to have a vote on, one, the gender of the victim, the survivor in the situation. Would you guys like this person to be male or female, a minor, a person who has married into the family system, or someone who was born into the family system? That's the first place to play. And then the abuser or the person who perpetuates violence, male or female, senior or junior, and what type of violence. So we're speaking about gender-based violence, so it can be physical assault or it can be sexual violence. And then I'll tweeze it out to show you so that everybody has a clear understanding of how it operates, and then we can ask deeper questions. Okay, so on the outset, that's a really interesting question. Homosexuality is illegal in Zimbabwe. It is illegal according to the constitutional law, and it is also illegal culturally. So that would never happen. It would never be a female spouse. It could be your mother-in-law. It could be a female member of the family. So I don't know if you want to adjust that question, but both those people would be in jail. So yeah.
So what I hear you saying is that even in that case, it would not be honored, right? Because a person would be like, oh, homosexual, illegal.
It's illegal, full stop. So this is not a possibility to have a female spouse or a male spouse, especially if you are female, unless it's a man who's been assaulted by a female spouse. But then the woman would have married into the family. So that's not a possibility. So according to Shona systems, women marry into a man's system. It's patriarchal. So it goes along, I guess, like that Father Abraham story. Okay, so we'll do this example. This woman, so according to Shona custom, this woman, when she gets married by her husband, right, and be a member of his family. So any children that she has are children that belong to her husband's clan. Should a woman assault a man in his clan, the family will come together and they will have a dare. So what happens there is typically the husband would have to then go and complain and say, look, my wife beats me. And he would speak to his brother, right? Who can either be Babam Kuru, older father, or Babam Nini, younger father. To the woman, this man is Atejara. These people are Atejara. So parents-in-law, family-in-law. In this case, there would not be immediate resort to the local court. Because they would say, go back home and find something to do. The woman doesn't have an opportunity to ask her relatives to come and represent her. It become a mark against his manhood. Okay, I'll speak to that. Yes, he could admit abuse. There is a tendency to be like, what caused this? And when that happens, the victim, typically has to explain, but the family is typically impartial. However, what comes into play in this case, though, is even within a family, as a woman, you have a secondary role in society. So they can always threaten to return you. And I say this in parentheses. So if you continue to misbehave, you will be returned to your clan. It doesn't necessarily create a mark on his manhood. It doesn't necessarily mean that he is emasculine. And there is no cultural foundation to say that a man will then be encouraged to beat his wife. Let's say that this case of IPV, intimate partner violence, were to continue, there still would be no recourse to the headman. So that's a fundamental flaw in the system, because if this same woman was to beat someone who was outside of the family clan, that man, let's say if it was a man, would have access to the headman, and then the local court system of justice would apply. Okay, so but what this case study illustrates, and which is something that I really wanted to illustrate, was that interpersonally there will always be immediate recourse and intervention when it comes to inter-clan violence, according to the system. So you will have access to the local courts if you have been physically assaulted or if you have been sexually assaulted by someone outside of your clan. You will have access to the local court and you can appeal to the chieftaincy, right? But what tends to happen more often is that women in gender-based violence, right? And in those cases, the system would still remain the same. You would still have to have these issues adjudicated within the patrilineal line. And there is a tendency to say, okay, no, there was rape, there was physical assault, there was gender-based violence. So it causes this chasm, be quick to commit violence or perpetrate across the clan or within the clan family groups, and people turn above these behaviors, or the externality of this pattern is youth. There are higher rates of youth homelessness. So the majority of people who leave the rural areas and run away and become home Africa and Zimbabwe, because everybody has a homeland. Everybody has a chief. Youth homelessness then occurs because there's extreme violence, there's extreme abuse, and there's no recourse. Whereas you could walk down the road and people know not to commit violence against a person who does not belong to their family at all. Okay, so the next question is, does the process outcome match the expectations of both parties? The answer is no. If the expectation is justice and recompense, the answer is no, because the expectations have generally been aggregated down. People do know that there's certain issues that people cannot talk about, right? Or there's certain issues that are just going to be solved within a family. Sometimes the outcome is people will say, oh my gosh, I can't believe that happened. And then you will have the Nare process. And then, several participants said that then you are shunned, right? So they'll be like, oh my gosh, how did this happen? And they'll ask all these questions that then turn out to be a case of secondary victimization, and then you are shunned. So it's just like dragged on, nothing really happens. There is no form of damages that is paid. The headmen aren't interested in hearing certain cases. And cases, however, if there isn't coercion by both men and women and there is a supporting party, do make it through the court system. There is a particular case, the private lawyer, which is the Murewa case. So this is a case where a 3-year-old girl got raped, and when it was reported, it went right through the local system. The chief could not decide on a decision at all, and it had to go to the court system. How this research ties to my thesis is that the alternative dispute resolution mechanism is supposed to foster healing and community healing. And this relates to transpersonal justice because we are all impacted by traumas that affect people. We are all impacted by community patterns. We're all impacted. Relationship systems are impacted by community patterns. Their sustainability is impacted by relationship patterns. But what happens is that there's a lot of coercion and there's a lot of intergenerational patterns that are sustained by the current system as it exists. So instead of fostering justice, it actually creates a system that maintains a victim-perpetrator complex within family systems that then leaks out to aspects of criminality in communities, while the justice system across clan members works, the one within families doesn't.
Tatenda, thank you. I have a few questions. I think some other folks do. But first, wow, so many things resonated with me. I really appreciate the way that you considered memory, right? As an identifier, like memory, history, right? Like lived experience, right? As a valuable research tool, right? And that you were like, okay, for this particular, thing I'm looking into, I need for folks to have experienced this time period, right? And I appreciate that. And I'm like, oh yeah, that, how many times do we like not pay attention to that, right? And the type of experiences, the type of quantitative, narratives that we can get from honing in on that. Like, were you there? Were you even there? Right? Were you present for that historical happening? Like, what is your memory of it? I really also appreciate you naming the shadow values, right? I was like, ooh, what are the shadow values that we, and I say like the we as in the field of systems change, right? Like what, and I know that shifts around context, but what are they, right? And how do we keep that open? Like as an open inquiry, right? Like what might be the shadow values that we are following, embodying, right? Because I think that like knowing that they exist gives us an opportunity to like see what they might be. So for example, we might say that our value is, regeneration. We might say that we have a value of integrity, but there's also the shadow value of like, well, I'm only going to do this work with people I know or people I like, right? and what that might mean to the work that you do and the impact that you're creating. I also really, man, aunties, I have one auntie that's like that. That's like a ride or die. Her name is Liz, right? And I named my first car that she gave me after her, actually. And I'm like, man, you know what? It has me question of like, how do people learn these roles, right? Like, how did they get created? You know, like, do you get sat down at like 9 years old and you're like, look, this is how, like, this is how it works, right? Like, if your trajectory is this, to be like I think you owe the what is it, the older father or the Baba Mini, right? Like these different roles that play such an integral part in the potential cohesion of the family, right? That were intended to serve some sort of like resource for people inside of that family system, right? Like, how do folks learn those roles, right? Or how do you integrate that role, right? How do I say like, okay, now it's me, now I'm one of the uncles, right, that gets to take care of the younger men here in my clan, in my family. And then finally, you mentioned the Kushiza, and it also has me think about like what are the patterns that show up in our work as people that are doing systems change, that block us from really showing up to the work in an authentic way, in an integrative way, right? And not have to kind of like, well, this is what I'm going to put out to the world, but I'm also going to, make it polished, or I'm only going to tell you the good things about what I'm up to, right? Or the good things that I've done. It makes me think of like, oh, what's at stake, or what do we lose when we do that? So those are all my thoughts, and I'd love to hear, from other folks what's resonated, or what's resonating with them, with you.
Okay, while people think, I'm going to address your questions, Lou. I will start with the last question, which is this idea of kushisa. So how presenting neat work compromise the systems change work? Honestly, when it comes to this, I don't know what it is about people insisting on success stories, especially when it comes to systems change work or any sort of change work. It is very difficult at some points in time to say, this is ugly, this doesn't look how I expected it, this looks like it's a total failure, this will not work, this system is just a placeholder, and admit that there are other textures that are ugly. Because if we say that something is not a success, it immediately becomes a dead end. And when something becomes a dead end, there is no interest in resourcing it. And resources play a very important role in our capacity, one, to do our work, and in the work continuing to grow. So obviously people, when they present their findings, obviously when people present their outcomes, obviously when it comes to the topics that we choose, right? We choose work that presents the possibility of systems change. We choose work that presents space for more inquiries. We present work that that shows that there is possibility. Because if someone was to say, like, if I was to speak about the nature of the work that I have done and what caused me to shift the work that I have done, it's just not nice. It's not pretty. It's not pretty. It's not pretty. And it's a superstructure, or a perceived superstructure that exists that is just futile. I remember the first time you and I had a conversation, and we spoke about constitution. So to go into the nuances of why certain issues simply do not make it through the court system, and there's simply no access to justice and resources for certain issues, presents a dead end. What makes more sense is then to look at alternative forms of justice and make an impact with systems change, right? Kind of like, okay, well, if you had to present how ugly it is, where it's a dead end, where it's like, it's futile, right? Then there's no reason to resource it. It's almost, that's it. And I guess that is owning my own shadow, especially when it comes to systems change work, which is just, there's some issues that I'm not willing to go because they are higher stake, systemically maintained than it has to be, which is degrees of relationships and how they impact systems change. So I will own people that I like, or I will only work is a problem for me. This is something not into echo chambers, especially when it comes to systems change work, because how are you going to know what's really happening when it's just people who relate to what you relate to, and it's just people who see things as you see it. And one way that I found to get around it, that fortunately the people that I worked with into the third and the fourth degree. So when it comes to Lou's first question, when it was like only working with people that you like, it's about knowing that, one, you have to ask smart questions, and secondly, reframing it. So I only worked with people to the third and the fourth degree. And because of that, I was fortunate enough to get people on different sides of the fence. People who were pro the existing ADR system, people who were anti the outcome, but very pro culture, people who create some sort of change. And it's one of those things where it's, as someone who goes to do any sort of work, it's like, why are you there? Is it for you? Is it not? From those questions, that inquiry, you are on the receiving end of it, right? And therefore be neutral and be open, and don't ask leading questions, and be careful of how you frame things. Does anyone else have any other questions to ask?
I have one more. Or do you have a question, Tatenda? Because I've been asking.
I just wanted to ask you guys, what else do you think, like, where are my blind spots? What can you see as potential areas where I can really look deeply, and maybe questions that I'm not asking and angles that I'm not taking when it comes to this work, so that it can have more of an impact?
Well, in the chat, Tatenda, before you had asked a question, Audinette mentioned, you having amazing clarity and understanding of what works and how it impacts modern dynamics, which might be difficult. It feels like you like you have so much intention, clarity, contextual understanding of what's happening. I think I can't name this as like a blind spot or as a limitation. I think I'm curious to know, kind of like at the edges of the familial, or even the clan, like from the youngest member to the elders, the grandparents, right? Like what are ways that these ways of relating get to evolve? I don't know, evolve is the wrong word. Change, adapt, right? I'm wondering like what that communication is, if any. Yeah, but that's not like I don't think that's a blind spot.
Okay. I mean, that is like, it's continuing ongoing work for me, especially because there's so much stuff that still has to be touched on. What happens in cases where people feel that justice has not been met, and other ways. So creative ways of alternative dispute resolution, especially when we move away from an insistence on cultural focus, and we look at what role healing justice would play here, and how the relational system can adapt. So that's like going deeper. It's not a place where I have answers yet, but it is a place where I'm looking to get different perspectives.
Thank you. Well, I want to say thank you so much, Tatenda. Thank you, folks, for making the time to be here, all the way from the West Coast, where it's like, I don't know, like dawn right now, to you know, to like, to hear to where you are listening into us. I'm grateful. I'm grateful to Tenda. And I think I'm wondering if I can ask one more thing. Is given the work that you're doing, you know, the insight you have, and I feel like the clarity by which you're doing this work, is there any advice you have for folks that are doing systems change work at this level, at the level of the familial, right, at the level of the communal, and I would say in the context of healing? Are there one or two things that you would say that we need to be paying attention to?
Put yourself aside, because it's triggering. It is triggering work, especially someone who works on the level of the familial, someone who works in the communal. There are places and spaces for blind spots, because we are part of the community, right? And even if it's not necessarily our family structure that we're interrogating, there are so many patterns and similarities, especially when we don't go so far and so abstract, right? I'm researching Southern Africa, I'm researching Zimbabwe. That's one. Secondly, flexibility. So really being flexible and humble in your approach, because there are things that people will say where, you know, it's like you didn't expect it, you know, and asking questions that seem to push an agenda really makes people suspicious. So being like flexible and open and being like, you know, and just putting yourself aside. And being open. Also, what really helped me, especially when I was struggling to pull the relationships together, to pull the community groups together, is technology is our friend. Technology is our friend. And it's not just when we're talking across borders or across cities, but it's also when we're talking across our immediate network and our immediate circle. So openness helps here. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. All right. Where can we follow you? Where can we friend you? When can we connect with you? You know, we can drop some of those things in the chat. We can also kind of follow up for the folks here if you like to be followed, contacted, linked, connected to. Yes, TikTok. Yes, drop the handle. Oh, there it is.
This is my email address. I am responsive to emails. I would love to get in touch with people. I'm always open to working with other people. I'm interested in what people are doing. I'm interested in the difference. I'm interested in connecting and in learning more. I do believe that a lot of, especially when people are working on the margins of systems change, or on the margins of anything, we sometimes get so beaten down by, like, you know, the bigger institutional structures. And it's like, if we just like help each other and work together and, you know, are flexible around like the differences and all of that, we're cool. Like, there's more of us than there are people who are institutionally established. So I believe in the potential of all of that. So yeah.
Amazing. Tatenda, thank you again. Thank you, folks. Thank you, Illuminate, also for hosting this platform. Thank you to Kelly Chase for supporting this work that we're doing here. I really appreciate you and appreciate everyone here for showing up. There's more to come. Please continue to come. Please continue to do that. Continue to bring the conversation, especially conversations that matter. So thank you so much. Again, thank you to Kelly Chase for sponsoring the series. And here at Illuminate, we are striving to continue to build connections and synergies that center systems change and justice around the world. And so please continue to join the conversation. Thank you so much, Tatenda. I'm so happy, I'm so joyful that you allowed us to be in a part of your journey in this work as well. So thank you so much, y'all.
Thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for attending, everyone. Bye.